The warm June air carried the scent of roses and expensive perfume through the Grand Hotel ballroom. Elizabeth Miller, 65, stood frozen among 200 wedding guests, her weathered carpenter's hands gripping the tablecloth with such force her knuckles blanched white. The room had erupted in laughter after her son Adam raised his champagne glass and smiled with that practiced charm he'd perfected in New York. "I always hated having this last name," he announced with a smirk many mistook for wit. "I was embarrassed by it in college, and it weighs on me every time I sign it. Today, by getting married, I feel like I can finally leave it behind." Elizabeth didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't let the hurt register on her face. Instead, she did what she'd done for nearly 5 decades as a carpenter. She took a measured breath, counted silently to 10, and committed every detail to memory so she could later understand exactly how to respond. The weight of the Miller name, the name she'd carried with quiet dignity despite its attachment to poverty and manual labor, suddenly felt heavier than any oak beam she'd ever hoisted. While the crowd continued chuckling, Elizabeth carefully observed the reactions around her. Adam's colleagues from New York, unmistakable in their glossy suits, laughed the loudest. His new bride, Chloe, tightened her fingers around her bouquet. She didn't laugh, but she didn't intervene either. Some of Elizabeth's relatives turned toward the New York table confused. Her aunt pressed a hand to her chest, and another began cutting into the flambé that had been served too early, as if dessert could absorb the bitterness. The ceremony had been at 5 in the afternoon at St. Lawrence Church, bright and solemn. Throughout it all, Elizabeth had clutched a folded memorial card bearing the name of James Scott, her husband Adam's father, who had passed away 14 months earlier from cancer. She'd kept it in her pocket since the burial like a sewn-in talisman. She thought of him now, how he would have sensed the shipwreck coming, how he would have recognized that shadow of nervousness at the corner of Adam's lips. A gesture inherited from her that gave him away whenever he was about to say something he couldn't back up later. Elizabeth thought about how they had raised Adam between double shifts and notebooks full of homework in the old neighborhood, when every dollar was counted in whispers and the refrigerator whistled at night because its motor was failing. She wondered where along the path the compass had gone wrong, in which hallway of his consulting firm he began to believe that the Miller name was a stone in his shoe. She didn't create a scene. She aligned her silverware precisely on the tablecloth and took note of the silence from those who knew who had paid for every one of Adam's notebooks, every bus ride to school, every pair of shoes when his growth spurts hit. Her trade had taught her that impulse was a poor advisor and that beams not faced with patience eventually give way. As Elizabeth scanned the room, she noticed small details. The photographer focused more on Adam's New York friends than on the family. Chloe's grandmother corrected a grandchild who said, "How funny." Her workshop neighbor, Larry Parrish, squeezed her shoulder as he passed a light touch that conveyed solidarity without words. When the toast ended, a cousin approached with a plastic smile. "Don't take it like that, Aunt Liz. It's just young people's jokes." Elizabeth answered with a phrase James used to repeat when humiliation disguised itself as humor. "Jokes that hurt are just cowardly truths." She searched for Adam with her eyes. He was surrounded by friends oblivious to her, as if she were just another nameless guest. At 10:30, she stepped onto the terrace to breathe. Chicago smelled like late spring blossoms. She turned on her phone and checked her messages. 2 clients asking for shelves. Her brother-in-law sending a heart emoji for the photo of the toast. A bank notification. She put the phone away and took out James's memorial card, speaking to him in a low voice. "You heard him, didn't you? Our name weighs him down." She wasn't asking for comfort. She was offering herself a purpose to protect what they were. When Elizabeth returned to the ballroom for the cake cutting, someone asked her to say a few words. She said very little. "Congratulations, kids. May life teach you to honor who you are." There was an uncomfortable murmur. She took a tiny piece of cake, savored the sugar like someone memorizing one more detail, and sat beside the empty chair James would have occupied. At midnight, she walked home alone down Truman Street, carrying a box of wedding favors cards with misspelled names, embroidered napkins, a photo of the newlyweds. The silent city amplified her footsteps and the murmur of her thoughts, which were not of revenge, but of care, a lesson she'd learned sanding doors. Push too hard, you splinter. Pass slowly, you rescue the color. At home, Elizabeth opened a green-covered notebook and wrote the date. She left 3 lines blank because some wounds need air. Then she wrote, "Note every gesture from today on. Do not explain. Do not justify. Wait." She placed James's card as a bookmark and descended to her workshop where the smell of wood brought her back to herself. On her workbench rested an order for a bookshelf for their library. She ran her hand along the edge and thought that this was the legacy she understood useful things firm made with patience. A late-night radio program played with a caller discussing how last names tell stories we sometimes don't know. Elizabeth smiled without humor. As she sharpened her chisel, she reviewed scenes with Adam the day she bought him a suit for his first interview, the night he asked her not to come to a dinner with executives, the time he corrected her pronunciation in front of his friends. She also remembered his early generosity when he shared his sandwiches at school. Nothing ever completely disappears in a child, she thought. It just changes place. The days following the wedding passed in a strange calm that reminded Elizabeth of the silence before a summer storm. Adam didn't call on Sunday as she had anticipated, nor on Monday. His silence confirmed what she already suspected. He considered the wedding episode over a bad joke that time would erase without explanation. She recognized this strategy from his adolescence. When he broke something or came home late, he would wait for the family routine to absorb the incident until it became invisible. For years it worked because James would intercede with that paternal diplomacy that softens rough edges between mothers and sons. Now, without his mediating presence, the void was more evident. On Tuesday, while Elizabeth was varnishing a round table for an elderly couple from the old district, her neighbor Thomas Warner, a retired postal worker, appeared at her workshop door. His expression was awkward as he held out his phone. "Robert, have you seen the wedding news on Instagram?" Elizabeth put down her brush and turned. Thomas was showing her a photograph of Adam and Chloe toasting. One of the comments, signed by a Michael Harris, said, "Finally free of the carpenter's last name. Now you sound important." She wiped her hands on her apron and gave him back the phone. "Thanks for letting me know, Thomas. Some things are good to know." He nodded with the gravity of someone who understands that certain pains need no words. That night, Elizabeth opened her social media profile for the first time since James's death. Her last photograph showed him smiling in their kitchen, making lentil soup in his blue Sunday apron. The condolence comments remained some recent from people who had just learned of his passing. She navigated to Adam's profile with the cold curiosity of someone examining a technical document. His bio had changed. Where it once read Adam Miller Financial Consultant, it now displayed Adam S. Scott Senior Analyst. The transformation was subtle but deliberate. He had relegated the Miller name to an initial and promoted his father's surname to the primary one. She checked his honeymoon posts from Santorini. In all of them, he was tagged as Adam Scott, with no trace of the name he found so burdensome to carry. Elizabeth didn't feel anger. She felt something more complex, the sadness of a craftsperson watching someone despise a piece she'd invested decades of work in. Because raising a child is just that, a work of precision where every gesture chisels the final result. She remembered winter afternoons when Adam, 8 or 9 years old, would sit beside her workbench and ask why wood had different grains. "Every tree grows according to the storms it faces," she had explained. "The marks aren't defects. They are the story of how it survived." Now, 25 years later, he was ashamed of the grains that had shaped his character. On Wednesday, Elizabeth received an unexpected call. It was Chloe, her voice tense. "Elizabeth, I need to talk to you. It's important." They met that afternoon at a quiet cafe downtown. Chloe arrived looking worried, dressed more simply than at the ceremony. She apologized for not being in touch since the wedding, explaining that Adam had preferred to avoid communication with Chicago while they adjusted to life in New York. What she revealed confirmed Elizabeth's worst suspicions about her son's character. Adam had intensified his obsession with erasing traces of his family origin, even inventing false stories about his past when interacting with important colleagues. He tells them his mother was a retired industrial architect, that he grew up in a residential Chicago neighborhood. Chloe revealed, clearly uncomfortable. "I've asked him several times to stop those lies, but he says they are narrative adjustments, necessary for professional networking." The coldness of that expression chilled Elizabeth's blood. Her son had turned the denial of her existence into a personal marketing strategy. "But there's something more serious," Chloe continued. "Last week we went to a dinner with executives. One of them mentioned he had lived in Chicago and knew the city well. He started asking Adam details about neighborhoods, school-specific places. Adam got very nervous and made up answers that didn't fit. The executive noticed the inconsistencies but didn't say anything at the time. The situation had created tension in their marriage. Chloe feared the lies would end up harming Adam's career. For over an hour, she confessed feeling trapped between loyalty to her husband and discomfort with his social climbing strategies. "I didn't marry him for his family origin, but for who he was when I met him in Chicago. Now he seems like another person obsessed with impressing people who may not be worth the effort." She told Elizabeth that Adam had commented privately about feeling trapped between two worlds, his modest childhood and his professional aspirations. He says his firm has colleagues who come from families with business traditions that when they talk about their fathers, they mention university degrees, trips, investments. He feels inferior. The word echoed in Elizabeth's mind like a misplaced hammer blow. Her son felt inferior for being her son. Elizabeth explained to Chloe that she held no resentment toward Adam, but she also couldn't pretend his words hadn't cut deep. A last name isn't just a label. It's a responsibility. It represents those who came before and commits those who will come after. If he considers it a burden, maybe it's time he learns to live without it. Chloe looked at her with a worried expression. "What do you mean?" Elizabeth didn't answer directly. Instead, she told Chloe about a client who had commissioned her to restore an 18th century table. It was rotted, paint-stripped, apparently useless. She'd worked for 3 months to restore its dignity. When she delivered it, it shone like new. 2 weeks later, the client sold it because he decided it didn't match his new decor. Chloe understood the metaphor. "And what did you do?" "I learned to be more selective about who I give my work to." After she left, Elizabeth opened the green-covered notebook and wrote a summary of the conversation. Chloe's visit confirmed her suspicions. Adam hadn't acted on impulse at the wedding. He had been planning this symbolic separation from his origin for some time. Elizabeth understood his dilemma, but didn't justify it. There are dignified ways to climb the social ladder without demolishing the foundations that supported you. That night before bed, Elizabeth took an envelope from a drawer that had arrived in the mail 2 days earlier. It came from Boston from a law firm. She hadn't opened it yet because something inside told her its contents would change the course of this family story that was just beginning to unravel. On Thursday, Elizabeth decided to open the envelope from Boston. Inside was a formal letter from the law firm Jimenez & Associates signed by a Thomas Jimenez. The contents left her motionless for several minutes. According to the document, she was the sole legitimate heir of Mr. Arthur Miller, who died on May 3, 2024, in Boston without direct descendants. The estate included real estate properties, financial investments, and business shares valued at approximately $10 million. The inheritance was conditioned only on proving her identity and her relationship to the deceased documentation that the firm committed to manage if she expressed interest in claiming it. Elizabeth reread the letter 3 times to ensure she hadn't misunderstood. Arthur Miller was her paternal uncle who had immigrated to Massachusetts in the 1950s to work in construction. He had founded a real estate company that prospered during the Cape Cod tourism boom and died single with no known children. The lawyers had taken months to locate legitimate heirs with the Miller last name. She was the only candidate who met the legal requirements established in the will. The irony was so perfect, it was almost cruel. At the very moment her son was publicly disowning their last name, fate revealed to her that this name carried a family fortune he never knew existed. Elizabeth put the letter in the desk drawer with other important documents and went back to work. She had to finish Larry's cabinets before the weekend, and concentrating on concrete tasks helped her process complex information. While planning the doors, she reflected on the implications of the inheritance. It wasn't just the money that struck her, but the confirmation that her last name had deeper roots than she had imagined. Arthur had built a business empire, created jobs, contributed to the development of a region. His legacy proved that the Millers could be as successful as any other family. That evening, Elizabeth called the Boston firm and scheduled a phone appointment with Thomas Jimenez for Friday. She wanted to understand all the legal details before making any decisions. She wasn't going to rush, just as she hadn't rushed to respond to the humiliation at the wedding. Big decisions required time to settle. What was clear, however, was that this revelation completely changed the perspective of her relationship with Adam. He had rejected a last name, believing it held him back. Reality would show him that he had despised an inheritance that would have transformed his life. On Friday, before the scheduled call, Elizabeth stopped by the cemetery to visit James's grave. She told him quietly about the letter from Boston, about the conversation with Chloe, about Adam's plans to erase the Miller name from his identity. "What would you do in my place?" she asked the gray granite where his ashes rested. She didn't expect a supernatural answer, but the clarity that sometimes comes when we verbalize complex dilemmas. James had always defended Adam even when his behavior was questionable, but he had also been firm in defending family values. She remembered him saying, "Children grow up to leave, but not to forget who raised them." The phone call with Thomas Jimenez lasted almost an hour. He explained that Arthur had been a meticulous man who had drafted his will with very specific instructions about locating heirs and managing the estate. One particular clause caught Elizabeth's attention. The will stipulated that only individuals who honored the Miller name with dignity and pride could inherit. It was as if Arthur had anticipated situations like the one she was experiencing with Adam. Elizabeth agreed to begin the process of claiming the inheritance, but she asked for absolute discretion until she decided how to proceed. Thomas assured her of total confidentiality. As a professional, he understood that family inheritances often generate tensions that require careful management. After hanging up, Elizabeth sat on her workshop bench and looked at her hands stained with varnish and marked by decades of manual labor. These hands had built furniture, repaired homes, supported her family during difficult times. Adam had watched them work since he was little, but now he was ashamed of what they represented. Arthur's inheritance offered Elizabeth the chance to show that the Miller name was not synonymous with limitation, but with the ability to generate wealth and progress. But it also presented her with a complex moral decision. Should she share this revelation with a son who had publicly renounced his part in their family history? Elizabeth opened the green-covered notebook and wrote a line that summarized her state of mind. The name he rejected just became the most valuable one he has ever known. She put the pen down and went for a walk through the neighborhood. The streets of the old district were quiet at that twilight hour, with neighbors watering plants on their terraces and children playing in the small square near the church. It was her world, authentic and simple, the same one Adam considered insufficient for his aspirations. As she walked, Elizabeth understood that the inheritance wasn't just money. It was an opportunity to teach the most important lesson of her motherhood, that the value of a last name isn't measured by the bank account that comes with it, but by the integrity of those who carry it. The weekend passed in a strange calm. No calls from New York, no messages of apology, no attempts at reconciliation. Adam seemed to have decided that silence was the best strategy for letting the wedding incident fade into oblivion. But Elizabeth had learned something fundamental. Time doesn't erase wounds, it only turns them into scars. And if Adam wasn't prepared to learn that lesson, he would have to live without ever knowing what he had lost by despising the name that had just become the key to a fortune that would have satisfied all his material ambitions. The decision was made. Elizabeth would wait. She would observe. And when the time was right, she would show him the true value of what he had chosen to reject. Elizabeth's curiosity about Arthur turned into a methodical investigation that filled her August afternoons. Thomas Jimenez had given her contacts of people who worked with Arthur for decades, and each conversation revealed new facets of a man who had transformed ambition into a solid legacy. The first to meet with her was James Cole, a retired architect who designed 3 of Arthur's residential buildings in Hyannisport. They met in a cafe in Boston's Beacon Hill, surrounded by the tourist bustle that fills the area in summer. Arthur was demanding but fair, James recalled, stirring his coffee. He never accepted second-rate materials even if they cost more. He used to say that a poorly built building is a betrayal of the families who will live in it. He showed Elizabeth photographs of construction sites taken during the 1970s and 1980s. In several, Arthur appeared personally supervising the work, dressed in blue overalls and a white hard hat. One anecdote struck Elizabeth in particular. During the construction of the most complex building, structural problems arose that required costly modifications to the foundations. Other developers would have looked for cheap fixes. Arthur halted the project for 6 weeks, hired additional engineers, and invested an extra $150,000 to ensure total safety. "My name will be associated with this building for the next 100 years, he told us. "I will not allow it to fall on any family." That sentence resonated in Elizabeth's mind like an echo of her own convictions about professional responsibility. The next testimony came from Rose Carter, an accountant who managed Arthur's finances from 1985 until his death. She received Elizabeth in her modern office in the financial district, surrounded by file cabinets containing decades of business documentation. "Arthur never spent money on personal luxuries," she explained, consulting old records. "He lived in a modest apartment, drove functional cars, ate at simple restaurants. He reinvested his entire fortune in new projects, or saved it." She showed Elizabeth bank statements that proved this austerity. During years of millionaire income, his personal expenses rarely exceeded $2,000 a month. Rose told her that Arthur had established a special fund intended exclusively for locating distant relatives. Every year, he set aside $5,000 for genealogical research. He hired private detectives, consulted parish archives, paid for ads in Midwestern newspapers, looking for information about the Miller family from his hometown. The search had been fruitless for decades, mainly because Elizabeth's father had moved several times after Arthur immigrated. He became obsessed with finding worthy heirs. He said that money without family was like a river without a riverbed. The third meeting was with Stephen Moore, a construction foreman who worked directly under Arthur for 20 years. He met Elizabeth at a traditional tavern in the North End, an authentic working-class atmosphere that contrasted with the elegant offices where she had held the previous meetings. Mr. Arthur never lost his working man's ways, Stephen assured her. He got up before anyone else. He was the first to arrive at the sites and the last to leave. On Sundays, he would come by to check that everything was secure. But what impressed me most was his memory for the family details of his workers. He knew our wives' names asked about our children, remembered birthdays and anniversaries. When my youngest son had trouble in high school, he helped me find a better school and advanced the money for tuition without asking for any collateral. He recounted other similar gestures, interest-free loans for employees' weddings, medical help during family illnesses, extra bonuses when grandchildren were born. The image that emerged from these testimonies portrayed a man who had maintained his essential values despite his economic success. Arthur had been the antithesis of Adam, proud of his origins, faithful to his principles, committed to his community. The contrast pained Elizabeth, but it also guided her on what kind of legacy she wanted to preserve. During the train ride back to Chicago, Elizabeth reflected on the responsibility that had fallen on her shoulders. She was not simply the administrator of a fortune, but the custodian of a family legacy that had taken generations to build. Arthur had worked for 4 decades to accumulate that wealth, in the hope of passing it on to descendants who would honor his effort. Elizabeth got the last testimony by chance. At Boston's South Station, while waiting for the express train to Chicago, she recognized an elderly man reading the newspaper on a nearby bench. It was Frank Miller Arthur's second cousin. As she found out later, he had learned of her great-uncle's death through the local press. He was the smartest in the family, he told her when she introduced herself. He always knew he had to leave town to get ahead. But he never forgot where he came from. He wrote me long letters telling me about his projects. He sent money when the harvests were bad, asked about all the relatives. Frank explained that Arthur's branch of the family had dispersed after the Great Depression, when economic hardship forced many young people to immigrate. We lost touch because there were no phones or good roads, but Arthur always promised he would return when he was rich to help rebuild what we had lost. Back in Chicago, Elizabeth organized all the collected information into a specific folder titled Family History Arthur Miller. She included photographs, transcribed testimonies, business documents, and approximate genealogies. It was a valuable archive that demonstrated the upward trajectory of the Millers from Midwestern farmers to prosperous businessmen, always maintaining values of work honesty and personal integrity. This documentation became the basis for Elizabeth's next strategic decision. She didn't plan to immediately reveal the inheritance to Adam, but she did want to show him that his prejudices about their family origin lacked historical foundation. She prepared a selection of photographs of Arthur on his construction sites, press articles mentioning his successful projects, and testimonies highlighting his business reputation. The temptation to confront Adam directly was intense, but Elizabeth resisted it for tactical reasons. First, she wanted to verify if he maintained his dismissive attitude toward their name, or if he showed signs of reflection. The most effective educational decisions require precise timing, like cuts in wood that must follow the natural grain to avoid splintering. The plan involved several sequential phases. First, silent observation of Adam's evolution. Second, evaluation of his attitude toward her and their family name. Third, a decision on whether he deserved to know about the inheritance, or if he should remain permanently excluded from it. It was a process that required patience, but the deepest maternal pedagogy admits no improvisation or emotional haste. Observing Adam from a distance became an exercise in patience that tested Elizabeth's self-control. During September, through his social media posts, she could follow the evolution of his new married life in New York. The photographs showed dinners at elegant restaurants, visits to art galleries, weekend getaways to European cities. In all the images, he was tagged as Adam Scott, solidifying his systematic abandonment of his mother's last name. His friends commented on the posts with phrases like, "You've become so elegant," or "You don't even seem like the same guy from Chicago," observations he received as compliments. The transformation was evident. He had managed to reinvent himself as the sophisticated professional he had always aspired to be. What struck Elizabeth most was the total absence of references to his family of origin. Not a single mention of James on the anniversary of his passing, not a nostalgic memory of Chicago, not even childhood photographs that could humanize his new public image. It was as if he had decided his life began when he got the job in New York and married Chloe. One afternoon in late September, while repairing an antique display case for a client from the Old District, Elizabeth received an unexpected visit from Paula Scott James's older sister. They hadn't seen each other in months since the funeral, and her presence in the workshop was a pleasant surprise. She arrived carrying a bag of pastries from a downtown bakery. "Elizabeth, I came to see how you are. The neighbors say you've been very quiet lately." She settled into the wicker chair that James used to occupy when he came down to the workshop on winter afternoons. Paula had heard rumors about Adam's behavior at the wedding, although no one had told her the full details. A cousin of Chloe's mentioned there were tensions during the toast. Is it true Adam said something inappropriate about the family? Elizabeth wasn't surprised the news had circulated. Chicago is a city where family news travels faster than the L train. She explained what happened without dramatizing, with the same neutrality she would use to describe a technical problem in a piece of furniture. Paula listened in silence, gradually furrowing her brow as she understood the magnitude of the offense. "James would have been terribly upset," she whispered at the end. "He always defended Adam even when he showed those airs of grandeur he picked up in New York. But this," she shook her head in disapproval. "There are lines you don't cross no matter how ambitious you are." During their conversation, relevant information emerged that Elizabeth hadn't known. Paula kept in sporadic contact with an old co-worker of James's, Kathleen, who now lived in New York, near the neighborhood where Adam and Chloe resided. "Kathleen has seen them a couple of times at the supermarket. She says Adam seems like a different person. Expensive clothes, studied manners, a more neutral accent." "And what do you plan to do?" Paula asked Elizabeth directly. "You can't just sit back after such a lack of respect." It was the question Elizabeth asked herself every night before falling asleep. She answered honestly, "I'm waiting for the right moment to teach him a lesson he won't forget, but it has to be something definitive, not a temporary scolding he can ignore." During October, income from Arthur's inheritance began to accumulate in Elizabeth's bank accounts regularly. Each month, she received transfers for rents from the Massachusetts properties dividends, from financial investments, and profits from business shares. These were amounts that exceeded her annual income as a carpenter, but they arrived with the naturalness of someone receiving the fruits of well-managed investments. This new economic reality posed practical dilemmas for Elizabeth about how to manage the wealth without altering her essential lifestyle. She decided to maintain her usual routine in the workshop, continue accepting carpentry orders, and keep living in the same modest apartment in the old neighborhood. The fortune was a pedagogical instrument, not a reason to change her personal identity. However, she began to discreetly explore options to use part of the resources for projects that would honor James's memory and Arthur's legacy. She contacted local charities specializing in helping families with financial difficulties, particularly those headed by carpenters, masons, or other manual laborers. In early November, Elizabeth received an unexpected call that temporarily altered her plans for silent observation. It was Chloe, her voice tense and urgent. "Elizabeth, I need to talk to you again. Something's happened." Elizabeth met Chloe at the same cafe from their previous meeting. The younger woman looked more disheveled than last time, her carefully maintained appearance showing signs of strain. She kept glancing over her shoulder as if afraid Adam might appear, though he remained in New York, unaware of this clandestine conversation. Chloe twisted her wedding ring nervously. "Things have gotten worse. Adam is spiraling, obsessed with appearances. Last week we were invited to a dinner with the firm's partners. One of them, an older gentleman named Richard, mentioned he grew up in Chicago near Truman Street. Adam panicked. He started inventing elaborate stories about attending private schools that don't exist, about how your family's carpentry business was just a quirky hobby while you supposedly ran an architecture firm." Elizabeth absorbed the information with the same quiet focus she applied to measuring wood for a precise cut. The depth of Adam's deception was more extensive than she'd imagined. "Richard clearly knew Adam was lying," Chloe continued. He just nodded politely, but afterward I overheard him telling another partner that Adam seemed inventive with his background. They're starting to question his integrity, and in financial consulting, reputation is everything. Elizabeth's expression remained measured, but internally she felt her resolve hardening like oak under varnish. "And what do you need from me, Chloe?" "I don't know anymore." Chloe's voice cracked. "When I married Adam, I thought I knew who he was. We talked about eventually moving back to Chicago, starting a family, building something real. Now he acts like Chicago is some embarrassing chapter he needs to erase. He's becoming someone I don't recognize, and I don't know how to reach him." After their conversation, Elizabeth walked back to her workshop alone. The November wind bit at her cheeks, but the cold clarified her thoughts. Her son wasn't just hiding his background. He was actively destroying his future by constructing elaborate fictions that were already beginning to unravel. The inheritance from Arthur offered an opportunity to teach Adam not just about family pride, but about the self-destruction inherent in denying one's true identity. In her workshop that evening, Elizabeth drafted plans for the Linda Scott Miller Foundation, naming it after her late husband's mother. The foundation would provide educational scholarships for children of tradespeople, interest-free loans for family workshops, needing to upgrade equipment, and medical grants for craftspeople with costly illnesses. She contacted Patricia Morgan, a lawyer who had helped with small business contracts in the past, to begin the incorporation process. "This is considerably larger than your usual projects," Patricia remarked when Elizabeth outlined her vision for a $3 million endowment. "May I ask what prompted this interest in philanthropy?" Elizabeth traced her finger along the grain of her workbench. "When you work with wood long enough, you learn to give the strongest pieces the most important loads to bear. I've been entrusted with something valuable, and I want it to support those who build with their hands." Patricia agreed to handle the legal aspects discreetly. "We'll need to draft detailed bylaws, define specific objectives, establish selection criteria for beneficiaries. It's complex work, but meaningful. We can keep your involvement anonymous if that's your preference." "Completely anonymous," Elizabeth confirmed, "at least for now." The winter weeks passed with Elizabeth living a double life. During days, she continued her carpentry business, accepting modest orders, creating furniture with the same meticulous attention she'd always shown. Evenings were devoted to the foundation, reviewing applications, evaluating proposals, coordinating with Patricia on legal details. No one in her neighborhood suspected that the quiet widow in the old carpenter's workshop was orchestrating a multi-million-dollar charitable enterprise. In early December, Adam finally called. His voice carried the forced cheer of someone selling something neither of them needed. "Mom, sorry I haven't called much. New York keeps us busy, you know how it is. The holidays are coming up. Are you doing anything special?" Elizabeth recognized the pattern from his teenage years. Avoidance followed by superficial conversation that carefully skirted meaningful topics. "Just working. Larry ordered a dining set for his daughter's new apartment. It keeps me occupied." "Still at the workshop every day? You should think about slowing down, taking more time for yourself." Adam's tone carried a hint of condescension masked as concern. "The work keeps my hands strong and my mind clear." Elizabeth paused deliberately. "How are things with your job?" Chloe mentioned some client dinners. The slight hesitation before Adam's response told her everything. "Great, really great. I'm up for a promotion next quarter. The managing partners have taken notice of my portfolio management strategies." "I'm glad to hear that." Elizabeth kept her voice level, not revealing that she knew about his faltering credibility. "It's important to build on solid foundations." Their conversation continued with mundane updates until Adam finally approached what Elizabeth suspected was his true reason for calling. "Listen, Mom, I wanted to discuss something. Chloe and I have been looking at some investment opportunities. There's this startup incubator that's showing amazing potential returns, but the buy-in is steeper than we expected. I was wondering if you might consider a short-term loan. Just $5,000 to help us get established. We'd pay you back with interest by summer." The moment she'd anticipated for months had arrived. Elizabeth measured her response carefully. "Adam, I find this request difficult to understand. At your wedding, you made it clear that the Miller name and everything associated with it was a weight you wanted to leave behind. Now you're asking for financial support from the same source you publicly rejected." The line went silent for several seconds. "Mom, that toast was just a joke. Everyone makes wedding jokes. I didn't mean anything by it." Words have meaning, Adam, especially when spoken in front of 200 witnesses. You've also changed your name on all your social profiles to Scott, erasing Miller completely. You've told colleagues I'm an architect, not a carpenter. These aren't jokes, they're deliberate choices. Adam's voice tightened with frustration. You don't understand how competitive my field is. Image matters. Connections matter. I can't be the guy whose mother works with her hands for a living. And yet here you are asking those same hands for money. This is ridiculous. We're talking about a small loan between family members. Why are you making it so complicated? Elizabeth closed her eyes, focusing on the sensation of the phone against her ear, grounding herself. A person who rejects what the Miller name represents doesn't get to benefit from Miller resources. It's that simple. If my profession and our family background embarrass you, then my financial support should embarrass you equally. I can't believe you're doing this. Adam's voice rose with indignation. After everything I did when Dad was sick coming back from New York to help with the hospital paperwork, the funeral arrangements. Your father would have helped you without hesitation, Elizabeth acknowledged. But your father also wouldn't have tolerated you denying his name in public to impress strangers. James Scott became James Scott Miller when he married me, and he was proud of that name until the day he died. Adam tried one final approach. If you won't do it for me, do it for Chloe. She's not responsible for any of this, and she's going through a tough time with all the adjustment to New York. It's precisely because I value Chloe that I think it's important for her to learn what kind of man she chose as a husband. Lessons in character cannot be postponed indefinitely. After they hung up, Elizabeth sat motionless in her workshop for several minutes, absorbing what had just transpired. The conversation had been emotionally exhausting but clarifying. She had maintained necessary firmness without resorting to disproportionate reproaches. That afternoon, she channeled the emotional tension into her work, focusing on the precise cuts and joins that would form Larry's dining set. The following day, Chloe called her voice quiet, as if speaking where she might be overheard. Adam told me about your conversation. He's furious, says you're being unreasonable, but I want you to know I understand. Not just about the loan, but about everything. He needs this wake-up call. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this, Chloe. I made that choice when I married him. But Elizabeth, you should know our financial situation is worse than Adam admitted. We've accumulated a lot of debt trying to maintain appearances in New York. Designer clothes, dinners at exclusive restaurants, weekend trips to impress clients. We're in real trouble. Elizabeth pondered this new information. How serious is it? We might lose the apartment if something doesn't change in the next couple of months. Adam keeps saying his year-end bonus will solve everything, but I've seen the numbers. It won't be enough. What do you think should happen next? Chloe took a deep breath. I think we need to come back to Chicago. Not just for money, but because Adam needs to reconnect with who he really is. This New York version of him, it's like watching someone slowly disappear. Would he consider that? Not yet, but I'm working on it. I've started mentioning job opportunities here, friends who've moved back the lower cost of living. Planting seeds. Elizabeth felt a new respect for her daughter-in-law's resilience and insight. Do what you think is right, Chloe, and know that my issue isn't with Adam as a person, it's with the choices he's making. I know. That's why I'm still here. In January, the Linda Scott Miller Foundation was officially inaugurated with a modest ceremony at Chicago City Hall. Elizabeth attended as an invited guest, maintaining the fiction that she was simply a representative of the local craftspeople community. The mayor gave an opening speech highlighting the importance of private initiatives that complemented public social policies. The Linda Scott Miller Foundation represents the best of Chicago's community spirit, he declared to enthusiastic applause. Supporting the families who build our city with their hands honors our heritage and secures our future. Patricia Morgan followed as president of the foundation, presenting a comprehensive report on the planned activities. The figures were impressive: 50 university scholarships to be granted annually, 25 interest-free loans for family workshops, 30 medical grants available, all funded by an anonymous donor who preferred to remain behind the scenes. The local media covered the event with positive articles. The Chicago Chronicle published an extensive report, including photographs from the presentation. WGN News aired a 5-minute segment on the regional news featuring interviews with the first scholarship recipients. A plumber's daughter headed to engineering school, a carpenter's son accepted to medical college. That evening, Elizabeth watched the news coverage from her living room, a strange sense of satisfaction washing over her. She had transformed Arthur's inheritance into something meaningful, that honored both his memory and James's values. The foundation would help dozens of families like hers every year, creating opportunities that would ripple through generations. Her phone buzzed with a text from Adam. Saw the news about some foundation for trades families in Chicago. Weird coincidence with Dad's mom's name. Know anything about it? Elizabeth replied simply, yes, it's a good initiative. Someone who values manual labor is making a difference. Adam's response came quickly. Any idea who's behind it? The news said it's a multi-million-dollar endowment. No idea, Elizabeth typed back. I suppose there are wealthy people who remember where they come from and want to help families like ours. The exchange ended there, but Elizabeth sensed Adam's curiosity had been piqued. The foundation represented everything he was trying to distance himself from Chicago's working-class heritage, the dignity of manual trades, the Miller family name, yet it carried the aura of significant financial power that he respected. In February, the foundation settled into its operational rhythm. The offices functioned from a downtown space near the Art Institute staffed by competent administrators, managing applications and coordinating aid deliveries. Elizabeth visited weekly reviewing cases and meeting beneficiaries personally. She watched young children of electricians and plumbers enrolling in university courses, family workshops modernizing with new equipment artisans receiving medical treatments they couldn't otherwise afford. The tangible impact of the foundation validated her decision to channel Arthur's inheritance toward constructive causes. During one routine visit, the program coordinator informed Elizabeth of an unusual application that had arrived by email. An Adam M. Scott residing in New York was offering to volunteer remotely for the foundation's promotional activities and expressed interest in collaborating financially with its charitable projects. The email included his professional resume, work references, and a personal statement explaining his emotional connection to the families of manual laborers. His mother was a skilled carpenter in Chicago, the coordinator read from the application. He grew up understanding the challenges and dignity of trades families and wants to give back to that community. Elizabeth kept her expression neutral despite the storm of emotions this revelation triggered. Adam had temporarily reclaimed his connection to his working-class origins to present himself to a foundation he admired while continuing to hide that same background in his professional life. The irony was perfect. He wanted to associate with the prestige of the foundation named after his grandmother without acknowledging the very heritage that connected him to it. That evening, she wrote in her green notebook, Adam wants to be part of an institution funded with money from the name he rejected. The education is progressing, but not yet complete. In early March, Adam called again. His voice lacked the confident edge that usually characterized his communications from New York. Mom, I need to ask you something important. He paused, struggling with what came next. Chloe and I are going through some serious financial difficulties. I was wondering if you could help us with a loan, something like $50,000. It's much more than I asked before, I know, but our situation has changed. Elizabeth detected real desperation in his tone. What kind of difficulties, Adam? The company is restructuring some departments. My position is secure, but they've cut the quarterly bonuses we were counting on. And the investment I mentioned before, it didn't work out. We lost everything we put in. Elizabeth listened to his full explanation without interrupting. He spoke of unexpected apartment maintenance charges, increased loan payments, the need to maintain certain appearances for professional credibility. He didn't directly mention the expensive restaurants or weekend trips that Chloe had described, but the picture was clear. The sophisticated lifestyle he had adopted carried financial costs his actual income couldn't sustain. I understand the situation is serious, Elizabeth replied when he finished, but my answer remains the same. The person who publicly rejected the Miller name doesn't get access to Miller resources. Mom, please, we could lose everything. I'm not too proud to admit I was wrong about some things. The toast at the wedding was inappropriate. I see that now. This isn't about the toast anymore, Adam. It's about the person you've chosen to become. Someone who invents false histories to impress colleagues. Someone who denies his mother's profession because it doesn't fit the image you're cultivating. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken accusations and regrets. Finally, Adam spoke, his voice barely audible. What would it take? What would I need to do for you to help us? Elizabeth had considered this question during many quiet evenings in her workshop. The answer came to her with the clarity of a design that had been refined over months of consideration. Come back to Chicago for 1 month. Work with me in the workshop. Learn to use your hands the way your grandfather and great-uncle did. Understand the value of the craft that built our family over generations. You want me to become a carpenter, Mom, that's not realistic. My career is in finance. I'm not asking you to change careers. I'm asking you to understand the foundation that supported your education, your opportunities, your choices. 1 month, Adam. After that, we can discuss financial assistance. And if I refuse, then you'll need to solve your problems without my help. The choice is entirely yours. 3 days later, Chloe called. He's considering it. Actually considering it. When he first told me your proposal, he was dismissive, said it was emotional manipulation. But yesterday he started looking at flights to Chicago. What changed his mind? Several things. His boss called him in for a performance review. It wasn't good. Clients have been requesting other advisors questioning his recommendations. And our credit card was declined at dinner with his colleagues. It was humiliating for him. I think reality is finally breaking through. Elizabeth felt a complex mix of satisfaction and concern. She wanted Adam to learn necessary lessons about integrity and family values, but she took no pleasure in his professional struggles. If he comes, Chloe, it won't be easy. I won't be harsh, but I won't coddle him either. I know. That's what he needs, someone who sees him clearly but loves him anyway. And Elizabeth, I'm coming too. You don't need to put your career on hold. My career will survive a month away. Our marriage might not survive if I let Adam face this alone. Besides, I've always been curious about woodworking. Maybe you could teach me too. The following week, Adam and Chloe arrived in Chicago on a chilly March morning. They took a taxi from O'Hare to Elizabeth's apartment in the old neighborhood. Elizabeth watched from her living room window as Adam approached the building. His shoulders were slightly slumped, his designer coat looking out of place against the backdrop of the working-class street. Chloe walked beside him, her posture more determined, her expression resolute. Elizabeth opened the door before they knocked, standing tall in her workshop apron. Welcome home. Adam's eyes met hers, and for a moment she glimpsed the uncertainty of the boy who used to seek her approval before it was masked again by adult pride. Thanks for letting us stay. She showed them to the guest room, formerly Adam's childhood bedroom, now converted to a simpler space with a double bed and minimal furnishings. Chloe unpacked efficiently while Adam stood awkwardly looking at the walls where his posters had once hung. The workshop opens at 7, Elizabeth informed them. We have a commission for a library table that needs to be completed by the end of next week. 7 in the morning. Adam's disbelief was evident. That's later than I usually start, Elizabeth finished for him. I've adjusted the schedule for your adjustment period. That evening, over a simple dinner of lentil soup, James's recipe, the conversation remained superficial. Adam asked about neighbors' local developments, changes in the city, carefully avoiding any mention of his financial situation or the conditions that had brought him back to Chicago. Elizabeth allowed this temporary avoidance, knowing that the real conversations would come naturally once they began working together. The first morning in the workshop was difficult. Adam arrived bleary-eyed at 7:15, wearing clothes too formal for woodworking. Elizabeth handed him a canvas apron and basic protective gear. First lesson is about materials, she explained, leading him to a stack of oak planks. You need to understand what you're working with before you can shape it properly. Adam's initial attempts at even simple tasks were clumsy. His soft hands blistered quickly from handling tools. His measurements were imprecise, his cuts uneven. Elizabeth corrected him firmly, but without criticism, demonstrating proper techniques, explaining the properties of different woods, teaching him to work with the grain rather than against it. Chloe proved a surprisingly apt pupil. She approached each task with genuine curiosity, asked thoughtful questions, and displayed a natural feel for the materials. The wood speaks to you if you listen, she observed on their third day, running her fingers along a particularly beautiful piece of cherry. Elizabeth nodded in approval. That's exactly right. Each piece has its own voice, its own story. Our job is to help it tell that story, not force it into something it's not meant to be. Adam glanced up from his struggling attempt at a dovetail joint, the metaphor clearly registering. He said nothing, but his approach to the wood became more considerate afterward, less forceful. By the end of the first week, Adam's hands were calloused, but stronger. His movements around the workshop became more confident, his understanding of the craft deepening. In quiet moments, Elizabeth caught him studying the tools with genuine interest, running his fingers along the grain of wood samples, observing her techniques with the focus he'd once reserved for his financial models. One evening while cleaning up, Adam discovered a box of old photographs in a cabinet he was organizing. "What are these?" he asked, holding up a faded image of a young man in work clothes standing proudly before a partially constructed building. "Family history," Elizabeth answered, taking the photo. "That's Arthur Miller, my father's brother, the man who went east and built something substantial from nothing but determination and skill. I've never heard you talk about him before. There's a lot about our family you haven't asked about." Elizabeth handed him the photograph. He started as a construction worker in Massachusetts after the war, saved every dollar, learned the real estate business from the ground up, eventually built his own company. He never lost his connection to his beginnings, though. Lived modestly, treated his workers like family, remembered where he came from. Adam studied the image with new interest. "He looks like Dad around the eyes." "The Miller look," Elizabeth agreed. "You have it too, though you might not recognize it when you're busy being Adam Scott." For the first time since his arrival, Adam didn't deflect or change the subject. He simply nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face as he continued examining the old photographs. During the second week, a significant shift occurred. A wealthy client visited the workshop to commission a custom dining set. Adam, expecting Elizabeth to take the lead, was surprised when she introduced him as her associate and asked him to help discuss design options. "My son has a particular eye for proportion and balance." She explained to the client a statement that was more aspiration than reality given Adam's beginner status. But the vote of confidence affected him visibly. He straightened his posture and engaged professionally with the client, drawing on his aesthetic sense to suggest refinements to Elizabeth's initial sketches. After the client left, pleased with their proposed design, Adam turned to his mother. "Why did you do that? I barely know what I'm doing here." "Because you know more than you realize, and sometimes people need to be trusted before they can trust themselves." Elizabeth handed him the finalized design notes. "Your suggestion about the table base was exactly right. You saw what the wood wanted to become." That evening, Chloe found Elizabeth alone in the kitchen. "Something's changing in him," she observed quietly. Last night he updated his LinkedIn profile. It now says Adam Miller Scott, the first time he's used both names professionally in years. "Small steps," Elizabeth noted, careful not to overreact to this significant development. "Not so small for him. And there's more. He's been researching job opportunities here in Chicago. Financial firms that might value his New York experience but offer a more balanced lifestyle." Chloe's voice carried cautious hope. "He hasn't mentioned it to me directly yet, but I've seen his search history." By the third week, Adam's transformation had progressed beyond Elizabeth's expectations. He arrived at the workshop early, often before her, eager to continue projects they'd started. His hands moved with growing confidence, his understanding of the craft deepening. More significantly, his attitude toward the work itself had shifted from reluctant obligation to genuine engagement. One afternoon, while they worked side by side on the library table, Adam broke their companionable silence. "I understand why you love this. Creating something real, something that will last. In finance, everything is abstract numbers on screens, projections, models. Nothing you can touch or feel proud of at the end of the day." Elizabeth nodded, continuing her careful sanding. "There's honor in both types of work when done with integrity. The problem comes when we value one at the expense of the other." "Like I did," Adam acknowledged the first direct reference to his previous behavior. "I thought I needed to erase where I came from to succeed where I was going." And now, Adam ran his hand along the smooth surface they'd created together. "Now I'm not sure that was ever true. The skills I learned here, patience, precision, seeing the whole picture while focusing on details, they're the same skills that made me good at my job. I just never made the connection." As the month neared its end, Elizabeth received news that the Foundation's first gala would be held at the Chicago Civic Opera House, an elegant fundraising event to celebrate its initial successes and attract new donors. Patricia Morgan had secured the venue and arranged for significant media coverage, including interviews with scholarship recipients and demonstrations of crafts by funded artisans. "We'd like you to attend as our special guest," Patricia informed Elizabeth during their weekly meeting. "The anonymous benefactor will be recognized, though not named unless you decide otherwise." "I'll be there," Elizabeth confirmed. Then, after a moment's consideration, "And I'd like to bring 2 guests, my son and his wife." Patricia raised an eyebrow, clearly aware of the family situation from their previous discussions. "Are you sure that's wise?" Elizabeth nodded, a quiet certainty in her expression. "It's time for the final lesson. That evening, Elizabeth found Adam and Chloe in the living room, reviewing their financial situation with spreading paperwork and worried expressions. They quickly gathered the documents when she entered, but not before she glimpsed the concerning numbers on their credit card statements. "I'd like you both to join me for an event this Saturday," she announced. "The Linda Scott Miller Foundation is holding its first gala at the Civic Opera House. I've been invited as a representative of the local craftspeople community." Adam looked up with genuine interest. "That foundation named after Grandma, the one helping trades families. How did you get invited to something like that?" "I have connections in the woodworking world. Some of the grant recipients are colleagues of mine." Elizabeth maintained her composure, revealing nothing of her true role. "It would mean a lot to have you both there." Chloe immediately agreed, but Adam hesitated. "Will there be people from financial or business circles there? It might be a good networking opportunity." "There will be many influential Chicago business leaders attending. The foundation has attracted significant attention from the corporate community." Elizabeth paused before adding her condition. "There's one stipulation, though. If you attend Adam, I want you to use your full name, Adam Miller Scott. No hiding, no half-truths." He considered this, clearly weighing professional opportunity against personal discomfort. "All right," he finally agreed. "It's time I stopped running from who I am." As the end of March approached, Elizabeth sensed that the moment of truth was drawing near. Adam had transformed during his month in Chicago. His hands were stronger, his understanding of craftsmanship deeper, his perspective on his family history more nuanced. But the final test remained. Would this transformation hold when confronted with the full revelation of what he had rejected? The foundation gala was scheduled for Saturday evening. On Friday night, Elizabeth sat alone in her workshop after Adam and Chloe had gone to bed. She opened the green notebook where she'd tracked this long journey of education and reflection. On a fresh page, she wrote simply, "Tomorrow the Miller name reclaims its true value in his eyes. May he be ready to understand what that really means." Saturday morning dawned with perfect early spring clarity, the kind of crystalline light that illuminates every detail with merciless precision. Elizabeth woke early, her mind already rehearsing the evening ahead. This wasn't about revenge, she had never wanted that, but about a necessary education, a restoration of balance that had been years in the making. Adam and Chloe were already in the kitchen when she came downstairs. They'd prepared breakfast, a small gesture that would have seemed impossible a month ago. Adam had changed physically during his time in the workshop. His hands were rougher, his posture more grounded, his designer clothes exchanged for simpler attire that somehow suited him better than the expensive suits ever had. "Morning, Mom. We thought you might want some coffee before the big day." Adam pushed a steaming mug toward her, his manner carrying a newfound ease. "Chloe's been telling me more about this foundation. It's impressive what they're doing for trades families. Scholarships, business loans, medical assistance. It's exactly what communities like ours have needed for generations." The phrase, "communities like ours," caught Elizabeth's attention. A month ago, Adam wouldn't have included himself in that category. The change was subtle, but significant. Chloe looked up from her notebook where she'd been jotting ideas. "I've been thinking about how my education background could support their programs. Maybe developing mentorship connections between scholarship recipients and professionals in their fields of study. There's so much potential to create lasting change." Elizabeth sipped her coffee, watching them both with quiet appreciation. The transformation in Adam was remarkable, but equally striking was Chloe's investment in a world she had married into, but was now claiming as her own. "The gala starts at 7. We should leave by 6 to account for downtown traffic." As Elizabeth dressed for the evening, she selected a simple but elegant navy dress that James had always loved, complemented by a handcrafted wooden pendant she had made years ago from a particularly beautiful piece of walnut. She secured her silver-streaked hair in a neat updo, applied minimal makeup, and surveyed her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked dignified, confident, a carpenter who had built not just furniture, but a life of integrity. When she descended the stairs, Adam was waiting in a well-tailored suit, far less ostentatious than his New York attire, but perfectly appropriate for the occasion. Chloe wore a stunning dress in deep green that highlighted her natural beauty without overwhelming it. But what struck Elizabeth most was a detail on Chloe's wrist, a delicate wooden bracelet that Adam had crafted during their final week in the workshop. His first completed project worn proudly by his wife. The drive downtown passed mostly in anticipatory silence. The Civic Opera House emerged on the horizon, its neoclassical facade illuminated by spotlights that turned the limestone columns to gold. A red carpet stretched from the curb to the main entrance where photographers captured the arrival of notable guests. "I didn't realize this would be such a high-profile event," Adam murmured as they approached the entrance. "There's the mayor, and isn't that the CEO of Midwest Financial?" A hostess greeted them at the door, checking their names against her list. "Ms. Miller," she nodded respectfully, "you and your guests are seated at table 1 in the VIP section. Please follow the usher." Adam shot his mother a surprised look. "VIP section, just how connected are you in the trades community?" Elizabeth offered a non-committal smile as they were led through the opulent lobby. The main floor of the theater had been transformed with elegantly decorated round tables, each seating 8 people. Their table was positioned directly in front of the stage with place cards indicating they would be dining with the director of a major Chicago construction firm, the president of the Downtown Business Association, a renowned journalist, and the foundation's legal counsel, Patricia Morgan. As they took their seats, Patricia greeted Elizabeth warmly, then extended her hand to Adam and Chloe. "So pleased you could join us tonight. Your mother has been instrumental in helping us understand the needs of the craftspeople community." Adam introduced himself with his full name, Adam Miller Scott, and engaged the table in conversation with surprising ease. Elizabeth watched as he discussed financial markets with genuine knowledge, but without the artificial polish he'd cultivated in New York. Chloe spoke passionately about educational access, finding common ground with the journalist who had covered similar issues. At precisely 7:30, the lights dimmed, and the mayor approached the podium for the opening address. "Distinguished guests, we gather tonight to celebrate a remarkable initiative that embodies the very best of Chicago's spirit. The Linda Scott Miller Foundation, in just a few short months, has already transformed dozens of lives in our working communities." The mayor's speech highlighted the foundation's achievements: university scholarships granted to children of tradespeople who would be first-generation college students, interest-free loans enabling family businesses to modernize, medical grants providing crucial care for craftspeople without adequate insurance. All of this has been made possible through the vision and generosity of an individual who understands that the backbone of America isn't found in corporate boardrooms, but in the workshops, construction sites, and homes of those who build with their hands. Adam leaned toward Elizabeth, genuine admiration in his expression. "Whoever funded this foundation really understands what communities like ours need. I wonder who they are." Elizabeth just nodded, her heart accelerating as Patricia Morgan approached the podium next. The moment of truth was approaching, inevitable, as the final cut that releases a sculpture from raw wood. Patricia adjusted this microphone with practiced ease. "Tonight we have the privilege of recognizing someone special. The Linda Scott Miller Foundation was established with a founding gift of $3 million, an extraordinary act of generosity from someone who wished to remain anonymous." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Patricia continued, "However, this evening our benefactor has agreed to be acknowledged publicly for the first time. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to introduce the woman whose vision and resources have made everything you've heard about tonight possible, Ms. Elizabeth Miller." A spotlight swung to their table, illuminating Elizabeth's calm face amid the surprised gasps from the crowd. Adam froze beside her, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief as she rose from her chair and made her way to the stage with measured dignity. Standing at the podium, Elizabeth surveyed the hushed audience, her gaze finally settling on Adam's stunned face. "Thank you for that kind introduction, Patricia. A year ago, I lost the most important man in my life when my husband James Scott passed away. In the months that followed, I received unexpected news. My father's brother, Arthur Miller, a man I'd only known through family stories, had passed away in Boston." Elizabeth paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. Arthur left Massachusetts as a young man to work in construction. Through decades of hard work, wise investments, and unwavering integrity, he built a successful real estate company. When he died, having no children of his own, he left his entire estate valued at just over $10 million to me, his only living relative who still carried the Miller name. The crowd's collective intake of breath was audible. Elizabeth could see Adam's complexion drain of color as the implications of her revelation registered. Arthur's will contained one particularly meaningful clause. He stipulated that his fortune could only be inherited by someone who honored the Miller name with dignity and pride. You see, Arthur never forgot his origins as a tradesman. He understood that true success isn't measured by distancing yourself from your roots, but by remaining faithful to the values that shaped you. Her gaze locked with Adam's across the room. Unfortunately, not everyone shares this understanding. 10 months ago, I witnessed my only son publicly declare that he had always hated the Miller name, that he was embarrassed by it, that it felt like a burden he wanted to leave behind. What he didn't know, what none of us knew then, was that the very name he rejected carried with it not just a history of honest work, but a substantial fortune that would have transformed his life. The silence in the opera house was absolute, hanging thick as workshop dust in afternoon sunlight. That night I decided that someone who disowns their family name shouldn't benefit from the legacy it carries. Instead, I established this foundation to demonstrate that the Miller name, a carpenter's name, a builder's name, could generate social impact, community development, and public respect. To show that the value of a name isn't calculated by the wealth attached to it, but by the integrity of those who carry it through generations. Elizabeth concluded with words that resonated through the hall like the clear tone of perfectly seasoned wood. A name is a responsibility, not a burden. It represents those who came before and creates obligations to those who will come after. If someone considers it dead weight, they must be prepared to live without the benefits that weight has accumulated through decades of family labor. The applause began slowly, then swelled to fill the grand space. Elizabeth stepped away from the podium, acknowledging the ovation with a modest nod before returning to her table. Adam remained frozen in his seat, tears streaming unchecked down his face. When she reached him, he stood wordlessly and embraced her with a desperation that communicated more than any speech could have. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he whispered against her shoulder, his voice breaking. "I've been such a fool." Elizabeth returned the embrace, feeling something long broken beginning to mend. We all lose our way sometimes. The important thing is finding the path back. The gala continued around them. Awards presented scholarship recipients speaking musical performances. But at their table, a more intimate drama unfolded as Adam processed the magnitude of the revelation. Chloe held his hand tightly, her own expression fluctuating between shock and a deeper understanding. When they finally had a moment of privacy during dessert, Adam leaned close to his mother. "All this time, you've been worth millions, and you kept working in the workshop, living in the same apartment, driving the same car. Money doesn't change who you are, Adam. It only magnifies it." Arthur understood that. He lived modestly despite his success because he valued substance over appearance. That was the legacy he wanted to preserve. "And I nearly destroyed it." Adam's voice was hollow with regret. "Everything I've been chasing in New York, the status, the connections, it was all here wrapped in the very name I was running from." Elizabeth shook her head. "Not everything. You've built skills and knowledge that are valuable. The mistake wasn't in pursuing success, it was in believing you needed to erase your past to achieve your future." As the evening wound down, Adam introduced Elizabeth to several business leaders, proudly explaining her dual roles as master carpenter and foundation benefactor. The respect in their eyes was genuine, not the polite condescension he had feared, but authentic admiration for her accomplishments and vision. On the drive home, Adam broke their contemplative silence. "What happens now, with the inheritance, with the foundation, with us? That depends on what you've learned and what you want to build from here." In the weeks following the gala, Adam underwent a profound transformation that extended far beyond his month in the workshop. He formally updated his professional profiles and business cards to read Adam Miller Scott, embracing both family names. More significantly, he began serious discussions with Chloe about relocating permanently to Chicago. "New York never really felt like home," he admitted during a Sunday dinner at Elizabeth's apartment. "I was always performing there, always one mistake away from being exposed as an imposter. Here I can just be myself." Chloe nodded her agreement. "The moment we landed back in Chicago last month, I felt Adam relax in a way he never does in New York. And I've been offered a position with an educational nonprofit here that aligns perfectly with my background." Elizabeth observed them both, noting the authenticity that had replaced Adam's carefully constructed facade. "And your career?" she asked him. "I've had preliminary discussions with Lakeside Investment Group. They're interested in my experience with sustainable investment portfolios. The position would be senior analyst, same as New York, but with more focus on local business development." Adam paused, a hint of his old uncertainty flickering across his face. "I thought maybe, if you're open to it, I could also continue learning woodworking on weekends, not professionally, but to understand the craft better." The request touched Elizabeth deeply. "The workshop is always open to you. Both of you," she added, including Chloe, who had shown surprising aptitude for detail work. Over the following month, Elizabeth worked with Patricia Morgan to restructure the Foundation's bylaws, creating a more formal governance structure with provisions for family involvement. Adam's financial expertise proved valuable as they developed sustainable investment strategies for the endowment, ensuring it would support tradespeople for generations. What surprised Elizabeth most, however, was Chloe's passionate engagement with the Foundation's educational initiatives. She developed a comprehensive mentorship program connecting scholarship recipients with professionals in their intended fields, ensuring they had support beyond financial assistance. "I've been thinking about what makes first-generation college students succeed or struggle," Chloe explained during a planning session. "Money helps absolutely, but so does having someone who can guide you through the unwritten rules of professional environments. Someone who understands both where you're from and where you're going." Elizabeth recognized that Chloe was describing her own role in Adam's journey, bridging his past and future, helping him integrate parts of himself he had tried to separate. By early summer, Adam and Chloe had found an apartment in a neighborhood not far from Elizabeth's, close enough for regular visits, but independent enough to build their own life in Chicago. Adam had secured the position with Lakeside Investment Group, and Chloe was flourishing in her role developing educational programs for the Foundation and other nonprofits. On a warm Saturday in June, exactly 1 year after the wedding that had triggered this entire journey, they gathered in Elizabeth's workshop to complete a special project, a cradle made from cherry wood, its design combining traditional craftsmanship with subtle modern elements. "It needs to be ready by January," Chloe explained, her hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "We wanted you to be the first to know." Elizabeth's hands trembled slightly as she embraced her daughter-in-law, then her son. The knowledge that a new generation of Millers would soon enter the world filled her with profound gratitude for everything that had transpired, even the painful moments that had led to this renewal. "Have you thought about names?" she asked when they separated. Adam and Chloe exchanged a meaningful look. "If it's a boy, we'd like to name him Arthur James Miller Scott," Adam said, "to honor the men whose values built our family, even if I was too blind to see it for a while. And if it's a girl," Chloe continued, "we're thinking Elizabeth Linda for the women who preserved those values when they might otherwise have been lost." That evening, after Adam and Chloe had gone home, Elizabeth sat alone in her workshop, running her fingers over the partially completed cradle. She took out the green notebook where she had documented this year-long journey and wrote a new entry. Today the Miller name found its future bearer. May they understand sooner than their father the true value of what they inherit, not measured in dollars, but in dignity, not in status, but in substance. The months passed with a new rhythm as Elizabeth divided her time between her Carpentry Business Foundation oversight and preparing for her grandchild's arrival. Adam continued his weekend apprenticeship in the workshop, his hands growing more skilled with each project. What had begun as an educational condition had evolved into a genuine passion, not replacing his financial career, but complementing it, grounding his analytical mind in tangible creation. Most surprisingly, Chloe had developed a genuine talent for fine detail work, her patience and precision making her particularly adept at inlay and marquetry. Elizabeth found herself teaching techniques she had perfected over decades to this young woman who had no familial obligation to the craft, but had chosen to embrace it nonetheless. "I never thought I'd enjoy working with my hands like this," Chloe admitted one afternoon as they collaborated on a decorative panel for the cradle. "In my family, success always meant moving away from physical labor, not toward it." Elizabeth studied the intricate pattern. Chloe was creating a stylized family tree with roots extending deep into the wood. "Some people think craftsmanship is just about the physical skill, but it's really about seeing potential where others see only raw material. About patience when quick results aren't possible. About respecting the inherent nature of what you're working with, instead of forcing it to be something it's not. Like raising a child," Chloe observed, her hand resting briefly on her growing belly. "Exactly like raising a child." In November, Elizabeth received a formal communication from Thomas Jimenez in Boston. Arthur's estate had been fully processed, all properties assessed and transferred to her name, all investments consolidated under her control. The final valuation exceeded initial estimates, nearly $12 million after taxes. Elizabeth called Adam to share the update. "I've been thinking about restructuring the inheritance," she told him. creating a family trust with clear provisions for future generations. There was a pause before Adam responded. Are you including me in those provisions? You're my son, Adam, despite everything that happened that never changed. Elizabeth chose her next words carefully. But I want this wealth to support our family's values, not undermine them. The trust will include education funds for your children, capital for business ventures that align with ethical practices, resources for family emergencies but not unlimited access without purpose. That sounds right, Adam agreed, his voice reflecting a maturity that had been absent a year earlier. We should earn the benefits of the Miller legacy by honoring what it represents, not just by carrying the name. In December, as Chicago disappeared under its first heavy snowfall, Elizabeth finalized the legal structure for the Miller Family Trust with Patricia's guidance. The document formalized what she had come to believe through this journey, that wealth without values corrupts, but wealth guided by principle can transform not just families, but communities. The trust established the foundation as its primary beneficiary with provisions for family education, healthcare, and entrepreneurial support. Adam would eventually serve as a co-trustee, but only after completing a 5-year period of demonstrated commitment to the foundation's work, a condition he had suggested himself. Christmas approached with gentle anticipation. Elizabeth expanded her small apartment's dining area to accommodate Adam and Chloe along with James's sister Paula and her family. For the first holiday since James's passing, the house would be full again, not just with people, but with renewed purpose. On Christmas Eve, after the others had gone to bed, Adam joined Elizabeth in the workshop where she was applying a final coat of oil to the completed cradle. It's beautiful, Mom. I can't believe you finished it with everything else you've been managing. Some projects deserve priority. Elizabeth ran her hand over the smooth curves of the headboard where she had carved the Miller family motto, "Build with integrity, stand with pride." She had found the phrase in Arthur's papers and adopted it as their own. Adam stood beside her, his reflection appearing alongside hers in the polished wood. A year ago, I thought I knew what success looked like. Prestigious address, important title, influential connections. Now I understand what you and Dad tried to teach me all along, that the only success that matters is becoming someone you respect in a community that values you for who you are, not what you pretend to be. Your father would be proud of the man you're becoming, Elizabeth said simply. Not because you've returned to Chicago, or because you're learning woodworking, but because you've found your authentic path instead of following someone else's blueprint. As New Year approached, Elizabeth received a special delivery from Boston, a collection of Arthur's personal journals that had been discovered during the final clearing of his residence. Reading them in the quiet evenings, she discovered a man of profound reflection who had struggled with his own questions of identity and belonging throughout his journey from laborer to business owner. Success without roots becomes hollow, he had written in 1973. I build homes for others while trying to define what home means for myself. Perhaps it is not a place, but a continuity, knowing that who I am today connects honestly to who I was yesterday and who I will be tomorrow. Elizabeth shared these journals with Adam and Chloe, creating a bridge between generations that had never met, but were connected by common values and challenges. Through Arthur's words, Adam found a deeper understanding of the legacy he had nearly rejected, not just of wealth, but of wisdom earned through labor and reflection. On a snowy morning in late January, Elizabeth received an urgent call from Adam. It's time. We're heading to the hospital now. His voice trembled with nervous excitement. Can you meet us there? Chloe wants you with us. 6 hours later, Elizabeth stood beside Adam as he held his newborn daughter for the first time. Elizabeth Linda Miller, Scott had her father's eyes and her mother's determined expression, tiny fingers curled tightly around Adam's thumb as if claiming her place in the family with unshakable certainty. Hello, little one, Adam whispered to his daughter. You come from a long line of builders and makers, people who create beautiful things with their hands and their hearts, people who understand that a name isn't just what others call you, it's the foundation you build your life upon. Watching them together, her son cradling his daughter Chloe, exhausted but radiant, the family circle expanding with new life, Elizabeth felt a completion that transcended the pain and confusion of the previous year. The Miller name would continue, carried by this tiny girl, whose existence represented not just biological continuity, but the preservation of values nearly lost through misunderstanding and false pride. In the years that followed, Elizabeth would watch her granddaughter grow from infant to curious toddler, delighting in her natural affinity for both numbers and materials, counting blocks before stacking them, sorting colored pencils before drawing intricate designs. The Miller aptitude for precision manifested differently in each generation, but remained a constant thread connecting them through time. Adam and Chloe eventually bought a house with a detached garage that Adam converted into a workshop where he spent weekend hours creating furniture for their home. His professional life flourished at Lakeside, where his unique perspective bridging financial expertise with trades understanding created investment opportunities for small manufacturing businesses throughout the Midwest. Elizabeth herself found a new balance gradually transitioning from daily workshop production to mentorship of young craftspeople, supported by foundation scholarships. She maintained her apartment in the old neighborhood, but spent increasing time at Adam and Chloe's home, part of their daily lives, rather than an occasional visitor. The most profound change, however, was the integration of the Miller legacy into their collective identity, not as an obligation to be fulfilled or a burden to be carried, but as a foundation that supported each family member's unique path, while connecting them to something larger than individual achievement. On Elizabeth's 70th birthday, Adam presented her with a handcrafted display cabinet he had made entirely himself, each joint precisely cut, each surface perfectly finished. Inside, he had arranged Arthur's journals, James's memorial card, Elizabeth's green notebook, and a new edition, a letter to little Elizabeth to be opened on her 18th birthday, explaining the journey that had preserved her heritage when it might otherwise have been lost. "This isn't just our family history," Adam explained as Elizabeth examined the cabinet with professional appreciation and personal emotion. "It's a reminder that we don't just inherit names and assets from those who came before us, we inherit their wisdom earned through both success and failure. The Miller name isn't valuable because of what Arthur built financially. It's valuable because of what all of you built in character and conviction." Elizabeth closed the cabinet carefully, her carpenter's hands now showing signs of age, but still strong and capable. "Names shape us, but we also shape our names. What Miller means 3 generations from now will depend on what you teach Elizabeth, what she teaches her children, and how each of you adds to the legacy you've been given." The workshop bell chimed, signaling the arrival of Foundation Scholarship recipients for their weekly mentoring session. Elizabeth smiled at her son. "That's the true inheritance, not what we receive, but what we build and pass forward."